Tonight, Sky News reveals the chaos in the asylum system. A minister admits it's a merry-go-round, which they want to end. We found Home Office asylum decisions are being overturned by more than half of applicants. And we'll tell you the story of a convicted sex offender given refugee status because a judge ruled he'd be at risk of mob violence. The government says it's already made changes to tackle the issue, but is it still failing to grasp the issue? I'll ask the Conservative Party Vice Chair, Matt Vickers. As a landmark report says children have been failed by gender services, we'll ask if both main parties have now settled their positions on trans issues. It's local and regional election time, so both the Conservatives and Labour are announcing plans to make our high streets safer. I'll speak to the shadow policing minister. And Rishi Sunak apologises to the Samba community after he was criticised for wearing Adidas trainers. We'll ask if it's a mere fashion faux pas or whether politicians would be better off sticking to shoes. Suited and booted with me tonight, Salma Shah and James Schneider will be with me for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Adam Parsons, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening. Well, we are going to look at a few things on the programme tonight, including Rishi Sunak's trainers, but there are two really serious issues that stand out: immigration and gender identity. Now, on the one hand, that's a pretty big contrast. On the other, these are exactly the sort of topics that get attraction in modern politics, subjects that fly on social media where nuance can sometimes get overwhelmed by noise. Hilary Cass, who wrote the report Into Gender Identity, said it was a subject that led to people being vilified on social media and, to quote her, where name-calling echoes the worst bullying behaviour. This must stop, she wrote. But of course it hasn't. If anything, the online anger today has been worse than ever. And it's the same with migration, an incredibly complex, combustible subject that touches on a dizzying range of policy areas, experiences, opinions, reactions. I don't think it ever helps anyone to paint all migrants as either good or all as bad. Like politics, it's almost never about these sort of binary choices. We shouldn't pretend that it is. First then, let's talk about immigration, illegal immigration. The Prime Minister made it one of his key pledges. He promised that those who enter the UK illegally will be swiftly returned or sent to a safe country. But official data shows that tens of thousands of people who've been refused asylum have not been recorded as having ever left the UK. Our community correspondent, Becky Johnson, reports now from Hull, where hundreds of asylum seekers with failed claims are still living in Britain.
Denied asylum, but they're still here. Many of these people are in the country illegally. Once a week at this church in Hull, they can get basic supplies from a charity.
People come and they can choose 8 items.
And there's high demand.
We've got about 300 people, possibly 400 people now, that are refused asylum seekers that are just surviving, under the radar in this city.
Sakile came from Zimbabwe 18 years ago, but despite having 5 asylum claims rejected, has never been threatened with deportation.
They just send letters and ask you if you want to go voluntarily.
Do you think that's surprising?
Yes, it is surprising.
And she's far from alone. In the decade to 2020, almost 2/3 of people refused asylum were not recorded as having left the UK. That's over 55,000 people. Home for Sakile is a bedsit paid for by a charity. These are the sons she left behind when she came to the UK. She hasn't seen them since.
What has that done to you?
Mentally, really, it's disturbed me a lot. I'm not myself.
And yet she stays because she hopes there's still a chance she'll be granted asylum in a system where no is rarely the final answer. When asylum claims are rejected, people can appeal, and appeals are decided in immigration tribunal courts by judges, not the Home Office. Since 2021, just over half of appeals have been successful.
We are a future of Britannia.
At a meeting of asylum seekers in London, we met Ali, who's appealing a refusal. So with the appeal, obviously you're going in front of a judge instead of the Home Office.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that you've got a better chance of success?
I'm so hopeful, yeah.
It was an appeal hearing that granted asylum to the Clapham chemical attacker Abdul Azidi, a convicted sex offender who submitted pictures of his baptism to persuade a judge he converted to Christianity. And we've discovered another case of a convicted sex offender who was allowed to stay in Britain because if he exposed himself in Afghanistan, he'd be at high risk of physical violence. But at the legal firm that represented him, they say it's unfair to blame the courts.
The asylum system is broken. That's the reality of it. Now you've got a government who makes the laws, who runs the system, who makes the decisions, but somehow it's lawyers? I mean, come on.
Labour says it's down to Home Office failings.
If there's such long delays, then you can end up with the system unravelling and being in chaos. Whereas if you have proper early enforcement, which is what should have happened in the Azedi case, then you actually make sure that those returns happen in the first place.
The Home Office says its long-standing policy is that those without a right to stay will be removed. But a government minister admits the system sends people round in circles.
We want to end this sort of merry-go-round of people coming in and advancing more and more grounds. That's why you might look at it differently, and we're determined to clamp down on that through the Illegal Migration Act.
But even if the government succeeds in sending people to Rwanda, thousands of failed asylum seekers won't be eligible because they've already been in Britain so long. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Hull.
And we'll bring you Becky's full report at 8 o'clock this evening on the UK Tonight here on Sky News. Well, another strand in Rishi Sunak's pledge to tackle illegal immigration is stopping people from crossing the channel in small boats. Government's plan to send those making that journey to Rwanda has, of course, suffered a whole series of setbacks. Today, the PM refused to name a date for when the first flight might take off. Well, our political correspondent, Gurpreet Nohan, as you can see, is sitting next to me now. And, I mean, have we got any clarity on when, if, how this will happen?
No, not yet. We're gearing up for the local elections. And as you can imagine, this issue of legal and illegal migration is going to pop up again and again on the campaign trail. And there are a number of issues here that are frustrating communities. Some of them Becky pointed out in her report, the rising number of asylum seekers staying in hotels, the rising numbers of asylum seekers who are homeless. And the government has come under repeated criticism for failing to get a grip of the asylum backlog. But as Becky pointed out just there, even those who are having their cases processed aren't being removed from the country. And this perceived failure of the Conservative government to get a grip of this issue is really exercising the right of the Conservative Party, particularly as many believe that it's partly to blame for the rise of reform and how it's eating into the Conservatives' vote share. But the government is keen to show that it's leading on the issue. And as you pointed out, the Rwanda deportation plan is its flagship policy here. However, it's repeatedly getting bogged down in Parliament. The bill is due to be back in the Commons next week. At least publicly, Rishi Sunak sounds confident. But when asked about when the planes might actually take off, he couldn't give a straight answer. But we can have a listen to what he had to say.
I just saw the president of Rwanda in Downing Street this week. They are absolutely committed to delivering on our partnership, and I'm confident that they've got all the preparations in place to do so. Now, I'm committed to stopping the boats. We need to have a deterrent so that if people come here illegally, they can't stay, they'll be removed. That's why Rwanda is so important. That's why I'm determined to see it through. First of all, we need to get it through Parliament, where the Labour Party has been blocking it for a long time. Once it's up and running, I'm confident we'll be able to operationalise the scheme, get people on flights, because that's how we'll set up a deterrent and ultimately end the unfairness of people jumping the queue, coming here illegally, putting pressure on local services and risking their own lives. None of that's right, none of it's fair, and none of it's compassionate either to do nothing, and our plan is the right one.
So the government also announced today that 150 of these asylum hotels will be closed by May. However, Labour accused the Conservatives of celebrating failure, pointing out that none of these hotels actually existed before the Conservatives came to power. So perhaps a bit of a predictable back and forth as the campaigning gets underway.
Gurpreet, thank you very much. Gurpreet Nohan there. OK, well, with me now to discuss is the Conservative Party's Deputy Chairman, Matt Vickers. Thanks so much for coming in. Do you think, in retrospect, focusing so much on small boats was a mistake?
No, I think it's a huge issue, and it's not just it's not a political party, it's not the government that's focusing on it. The country is focused on this. When I'm out knocking on those doors, it's a really big issue to people out there, and it's one we've got to solve. We've seen what happened in Albania when we put a deterrent in place that meant if you arrived here, you were being returned, you've been detained, returned. We saw what that did in terms of determining people coming in and then making that decision not to get in those boats and not to travel to this country. So it's entirely right that we bring forward something to deter everybody else.
The numbers are up this year.
When we'll look at what happens when you put a deterrent in place, like Albania, numbers went down 96%. If we can put a deterrent in place for people coming from elsewhere in the globe, then we can have that same impact, and hopefully we can drive it down by as much as 96%. But we need to do something.
You think Rwanda will be that deterrent? I've spoken to a lot of migrants in a lot of places over the years, and I've only ever met one person who said they were put off by the Rwanda plan.
Do you know what? The fact that you will be... We obsess a little bit with where we're sending people, but actually the reality is, the principle at stake here is that if you arrive in this country illegally, you are going to be detained and you are going to be returned or sent elsewhere. That principle, that is the deterrent that's worked in Albania, and that is the deterrent and the thing that will work in driving down small boats across the piece.
Do you agree, as Laura Farrar said, that we've got at the moment a merry-go-round?
I think, do you know what we've seen? We've seen this legislation come forwards. We've seen us fighting with lefty lawyers and with the judicial system to get this thing forward. We've seen all the votes that the Labour Party have cast. Every time we've brought something forward that would toughen up the immigration system in this country, Keir Starmer and his Labour Party have voted it down. We even saw the Labour Party MPs out there opposing the deportation of foreign criminals. We've got to get on with it. We've got to get this thing marching. We've got to make it happen, because the taxpayer cannot keep picking up this bill. It has a huge cost on this country. It has a huge cost on some of those public services that are strained by the entire thing.
Laura Farrar also said it is right to give sanctuary to those who have fled persecution. Do you go along with that? I mean, your government has criminalised everyone who's crossed the channel in a small boat.
There are safe and legal routes. People who arrive here legally via those safe and legal routes.
How do you do that? Let's say I'm fleeing Kurdistan.
Well, we've brought huge volumes of people here from Ukraine. We've brought huge volumes of people here.
Kurdistan.
Yeah, well, that might be a decision we would make. But, if we can control immigration, we can then make decisions, and we can actually be even more caring for people coming from some of those places. But at the moment, we haven't got that control.
There's no legal way for someone to claim asylum in Britain if they come from Somalia, Iraq, Kurdistan.
The government and Parliament will be able to decide where we are taking people from, where that need is greatest. But we can't do that at the moment, because the people who come from all these countries, they join a queue in the immigration system, a very long queue that's pressured by people who arrive here illegally. So actually, if we can get that illegal arrival under control, we can then make real decisions about what we do to support others.
Of course.
It's a huge challenge. You know what? Was it 500 when this small boats thing started just a few years ago? And people are coming here en masse, enabled by some of the most evil criminal gangs on earth who are happy to profit from other people's peril, putting them in these dinghies and sending them across this hugely busy channel that puts people's lives at risk, and somebody is profiting from it. It's not acceptable, and we've got to do something about it.
Let's stay on the topic of criminalising things. Shop workers today. You're proposing new legislation for the crime of assaulting a shop worker. Very laudable. How is that different from assaulting anyone else?
So I'll tell you what, the government isn't just proposing it. I've been scrapping on this for a long time, because I think it's really important. And how do you differentiate? So if you look at crime across the country, violent crime is down 51% since 2010. Neighbourhood crime is down 48% since 2010. Retail crime, since the pandemic, is up significantly. 1,300 retail workers are assaulted, not every month, not every week, every single day. Those are people who go with it.
That's violent, and we should say that isn't all physical.
It's assault. It's assault.
So that can be verbal.
It's people who are intimidated in their place of work. And those people, that might be a young student who's got his first job. It might be a semi-retired person who's topping up their income so they can take their grandkids on a nice holiday, and they have every right to go about their work without the levels of intimidation and abuse that we're seeing. We can't accept that.
And what percentage of those end up with a prosecution?
Well, it's not as high as it should be, but one of the problems that we've got... Yeah, one of the problems that we've got is, retailers will tell you, the retailers have been working on this solution with us, and the retailers tell us that when they ring the police, very often the police don't come, because it's deemed that retail crime is very frequent, happens all the time, and it's low level. Well, we need to change that, and actually, we need to hold senior police officers to account.
Sorry to interrupt, but isn't this is your government. The reason they don't report it is because if it's below £200, it's deemed to not
That's a
be
complete and utter
priority.
misconception. There is nothing that prevents a police officer from arresting and prosecuting someone under £200.
That is a myth.
That's
but
a
it's
myth.
about prioritisation.
Well, that is a myth.
One of the reasons retailers don't report these things in, number one thing they say is they don't think it'll be taken seriously. They don't think the police will take it seriously.
So first up, the £200 thing is a myth. Police officers can still arrest and prosecute people. Can and will. And
but they have to have priorities.
Well, a survey that was carried out of every police force in the country found no police force has that policy. It's a myth. But anyway, back to the assaults on retail workers. Really important issue for many people in many communities across the country. We differentiate because the government imposes rightly a duty on retail workers to uphold the rules, statutory duty. If you sell booze to somebody underage, if you sell a knife to somebody underage, there's a sanction for that and you've committed an offence. So I think that statutory duty requires statutory protection, and that's why we're bringing this forwards, and it's happening. Actually, we've consulted with the sector for ages. It's not just about, this is not one solitary measure, it's a series of measures. It's about the fact that we're creating a standalone offence so police forces can see, we can see, the people can see where we're dealing with this issue and where it is the biggest problem, and we can make sure that chief constables are dealing with it adequately. But then if you do that, you're also virtually automatically given a criminal behaviour order. That means you can't return to that premises. And if you break that sanction could be as much as 5 years in prison. We're then seeing all the things we're doing on facial recognition to arm the police and let them detect these people and find them and then we're going to tag the people who commit more than 3 offences in this field.
It's a comprehensive... Matt, because I want to show you something. We talked earlier about social media. Here's one that's going around about you today. Up in Yarm, we had today Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper, who were heckled by people who have a banner. Were these people, I think you could see it on some of these screens there, were these your staff?
Were these my staff? No.
Categorically not?
I've been down here with you all day today, but I think one's been identified as a local councillor. Yeah, they're out with a view. They could be anybody, to be quite frank. Nobody said who they were or they weren't, and nobody said we are or we aren't associated with whoever.
Were you behind this, though? Did you encourage it? I mean,
I've been down here speaking to wonderful people like you all
but
day.
Hey, we've all had phones. We'll have emails. You can get on the phone and say, guys, get out there and make them feel uncomfortable.
No,
what do you think?
Do you know what I think? What the story might be here? It might be about Angela Rayner's tax affairs. Now people are slightly concerned about them. I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah. I want to ask you also about the CAS review that came out today. Really serious body of work. It's been so divisive, this trans issue. Do you think this draws a line under it? Hilary Cass herself saying this has polarised communities and caused enormous damage.
Do you know what? I think it has polarised. I think some of the discussion. Do you know what? It's a really complex issue.
Yeah.
It requires decent discussion, proper informed discussion, and not jumping down to an assumption that anybody who tries to restrict such things is bad. I think everybody wants to see people live their lives the way they want to live them. I think, though, that we have to put protections in place and reassurance to people who are going through it, because young people can end up in really terrible situations where they make a decision they later regret. And it's right that we're putting those protections in place and supporting those people, many of whom might be very vulnerable.
Matt Vickers, thanks ever so much for coming in tonight on the Politics Hub. Appreciate your time. That story, all of the ones we've talked about, sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. And we will be having our extended press preview and our news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us for that will be the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall Editor, that is Claire Ellicott. Our Chancellor Home Secretary also coming. There you go. Can see them chatting away in the supermarket. Yvette Cooper and Angela Rayner. Going to be speaking to the Labour Shadow Policing Minister a little later on how they plan to make our high streets safer, and we're hearing there from Alex Norris. Let's bring in our duo for tonight, former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah and the former Chief Strategist to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Well, evening to both of you. Salma, let's start with you. I mean, the question of migration, illegal migration, it is this thorn that has followed us around in politics. Do you think Rishi Sunak was right to invest so much political capital in this?
Well, subsequent to his announcement, I think it's obvious that he shouldn't have spent so much political capital on this because the task is so monumental, especially when it comes to the small boats. And the fact that he keeps doubling down on this issue is actually making it a lot worse because it's really focusing people's attention on the failure. So from a political standpoint, in what is potentially an election year, if we don't go to January, it isn't the most sensible thing to do. However, if you think about the practicalities of it, you know, your own very good package on asylum and the backlog in asylum, it is an issue that does need to be tackled. So it's really about what approach he wants to take. Unfortunately, we're going into this hardline situation where it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher, and lots more people are being turned off from this aggressive idea and sort of conflating failed asylum seekers with refugees, with economic migration and with illegal migrants still coming over. So it's become a real mess in terms of communication as well.
And James, a diplomat said to me, it's a very complex matter, migration. The right at least has an answer. You might not agree to it. The problem for the left is they don't really seem to have a coherent policy.
Well, I think you were just hearing from Salma that the right doesn't actually have much of a plan at all. And we see this with the Stop the Boats, which isn't stopping the boats and doesn't work and isn't clearing the backlog. If you want to clear the backlog, you need to hire more people to process the cases, interpreters and translators to do the work. We have a case where 10 years ago, nearly all of asylum cases were processed within 6 months. So that means within 6 months, you know who has the right to be here, what help they need, how they can be supported to integrate into the community, and who shouldn't be here. Now it's almost none. And to me, it seems that's the obvious place to start. A very good friend of mine recently got granted asylum. He is a completely open and shut case. He was here for 18 months. He was on the Bibi Stockholm. That's 18 months where he couldn't be working, he couldn't contribute to society. He tried to contribute, can't contribute. The public has to pay for the accommodation, the hotels, the ridiculous, theatrical cruelty of the barge. All of that stuff needs to go. And the diplomat is wrong actually that the right have an answer. None of this stuff is working. Cruelty doesn't work.
Can I just say though, James? So you say that you need to just find people who are going to process this stuff. I mean, I imagine that the Home Office has looked at that. I think the point that Adam's trying to make is we don't have, therefore, an ideological difference on what should be done. So you're basically saying that your position and Labour's position is to essentially replicate what the Conservatives are doing in government, but just do it better. That's what you're saying.
I would say that's what Labour's position is. That's not what my position is. I would have a quite thoroughgoing overhaul that, if we have time, I can go into. But that is how Labour has operated. They say, we are good managers with good values, and the Tories are bad managers with bad values, so give us a go. And as your question implies, that's not really up to very much because it's basically the same machine that is operating in the same way. So really, if we want to deal with issues of refugees, we need to create safe routes so that people can come. We need to have ways that they can be processed. People need to have the right to work and receive healthcare when they're here. And we need to have a humane and sensible system for legal migration.
And we will come back to other topics a little later in the show. For the moment, Sarah and James, thanks very much indeed. You are watching The Politics Hub. And coming up, Prime Minister urges extreme caution on gender treatments as a major review finds NH services have failed children. As Labour sets out plans to revive the high street and crack down on shoplifters, I'll be speaking to the Shadow Policing Minister Alex Norris. And as the PM is also accused of ruining an eternally cool, we say sneaker, I'm going to say trainer. We'll ask whether politicians should steer clear of trainers. Stick with us.
In order to affect policy change, we need good scientific foundation for our campaigning work. And so I'm very pleased to say that Andrew Knight and Emily Davis reviewed 42 pieces of published scientific peer-reviewed literature looking at the health and welfare of tigers, in particular kept in circus environments. They looked at several things. They looked at their nutrition, their environment, behavioural interactions, their health and their mental health too. And they found that all of these were unsurprisingly compromised by the small enclosures, the constant travelling, the inaccessibility of proper food, as you've mentioned, the exposure to loud noises and crowds, exposure to other animals too. And this was very clearly, as a result of their investigation, not an environment where we should continue to keep tigers. Now, obviously in the UK, this has been phased out, but I'm very sad to say that across Europe, we still see a large number of big cats being kept in circuses, and it's a serious issue. Well, constant campaigning over many years, lots of agencies got together and pointed out the inadequacies of, our ability to keep animals when they were travelling like this. They're significantly compromised. So, when you think that a tiger, for instance, in the course of its day in the wild would roam over 50 square kilometres, and its exercise area when it's in a travelling circus is a few square metres, it was never going to work. And, Wales jumped first, and then we had changes in Scotland, Northern Ireland, England the last to move, but we're not going to see wild animals in travelling circuses in the UK. But as I say, unfortunately, in Germany and France, in Spain, these are still very common. And some of these animals end up in the UK because they're being rescued. We see that they have been declawed. The mutilation of circus animals is also frequent. They cut their claws off to make it safer, of course, when they're handling them. They saw their teeth off, and this instigates long-term health difficulties.
A major review into gender care for young people has found children are being failed. The report, commissioned by NHS England, found that young people are being let down by a lack of evidence on the use of puberty blockers and hormones in a debate that has become exceptionally toxic. The Prime Minister has said the review shows the need to exercise extreme caution. Labour says it raises serious concerns. Sky's Molly Malone reports.
Out of the closet! Into the streets!
It is, as described in today's report, an exceptionally toxic debate about how children questioning their gender should be treated. Political posturing and polarisation, but still people at the centre of it all.
Rights, human rights!
One of them, Jack, which isn't his real name, who started seeking gender identity treatment a decade ago. He's now on an adult waiting list for hormone treatment, but wants today's review to change things in the future.
I wish that it had been more open and that it had been, more of a safe space where I felt like I could have spoken and been honest with people, and that not felt like I had to prove myself. There are children that have been let down by the service in multiple different ways. What I hope is that with this new service, with the recommendations that Cass is making, that a service can be created that lets less people down.
Dr. Cass's review said children have been let down by remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions, recommending an extremely cautious approach in the future if hormone treatments used to delay the onset of puberty are given before the age of 18. She suggests holistic care needs to be taken when assessing children, and that mental health or neurodevelopmental considerations are made, and says it's possible that a child's social transition, where they use a different name or pronoun, can change the trajectory of their development. It's that language that some in the trans community are worried about.
We have a number of concerns. So some of those are about the way that things are framed very ambiguously and the fact that they are very open to misinterpretation, particularly around areas such as social transition, access to gender-affirming hormones, and puberty blockers. So there are a number of areas where the implementation will be key.
Have you felt that has made a difference?
What has made a difference is the political argument. The report made clear other healthcare services are not discussed or debated like gender treatments. The Prime Minister, though, on a trip today to talk about crime, welcomed the review's recommendations.
It's very much in alignment with our way of thinking, which is to exercise extreme caution on these issues because we simply do not know the long-term consequences and impacts.
The NHS say they've made progress in shutting down the Tavistock Centre, the once centralised clinic for child gender treatment, as new regional clinics open up. And they have new policies too on stopping the routine prescription of puberty blockers. But still, the conversation and the criticism will be loud, online and offline. Legal disputes, protest and rows about rights. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Let's talk to our duo for tonight, former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah and the former Chief Strategist to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. James, I'll start with you. I mean, it's an unbelievably contentious, difficult, charged topic, this one, isn't it?
Well, it's been made into being one. I mean, no issue is necessarily contentious and charged. I think what has been whipped up is a moral panic about the issue, which, as you say, is a complex one. It relates to a very, very small percentage of the population, and it's not uniform. You know, the things that people are going through go in lots of different directions. They could be treated and engaged with and supported in a whole series of different ways. And when you have quite a large chunk of the political and media class, you know, baying about the issue.
Wes Streeting says that critics have been silenced in this issue. He's actually apologised to them. I mean, what do you think?
Critics of
trans rights.
Well, I mean, I don't think that critics of trans rights should be apologised to. I mean, trans people should have rights.
He's saying he's apologised. He says that this has happened, that these people have been silenced in the debate.
Well, I haven't seen what Wes Streeting said. I don't follow his work terribly closely. But if I were to interpret that, I suggest he's saying that the sort of gender-critical position has been silenced in debate. And I find that quite an odd position, given that that's what's espoused by the Prime Minister from what he just said. I think there are lots of people with newspaper columns in major newspapers that say that. It seems like it's not a silenced issue at all. And a lot of what we hear, a lot of this heat, a lot of this thing doesn't really get us very far. If what we really want is to provide the best possible support and services for a group of a very small group of people that have certain, that have certain difficulties or certain issues, then that should be worked out in that sort of way, rather than it being this huge totemic culture war issue that can be coded with everything else.
Yeah, Salma, your former boss, Sajid Javid, was the man who commissioned this report. I mean, I guess the idea was to try and draw a line under it, but I don't know if it has done.
I think the idea of this, and I haven't spoken to him about it, but I read his piece in the Times today, and I'm very supportive and very proud of the fact that he did commission this report for two reasons. One, the primary group here is not, it's not people who are gender critical or pro-trans. The primary group that we're talking about are children. And that, I think, is where his...
Children and young adults.
Young adults. And that's where I think his concern came in. Because if you're talking about dramatic action like puberty blockers, you are talking about, young children in this instance too. So I think we have to focus our attention on that. And what did the report actually say? What did the Cass review actually say by Dr. Hilary Cass, who is a paediatric doctor, an expert in her field, that was totally independent from political views? It's about the fact that actually these services that were provided were not holistic, as they would claim to be. They were made more difficult as a consequence of the toxicity of the debate. So I think that those are the things that we have to focus on. If we want to get to outcomes, that the fact that Wes Streeting has said anything about this or, used it to talk about culture wars, I think is actually quite negative. We should focus on the facts and the science and the evidence of a very eminent clinician that are in front of us.
And James, Labour have clearly rolled in behind this report. Momentum, more critical. What do you think Labour's position should be?
I think Labour's position should be led by the science and led by empathy and supporting rights for all, and not trying to pander to efforts that are trying to turn it into a culture war, moral panic. I think that would be the thing that would be most in the interests of children and young adults. I think that would be the thing that would be the most in
So
interest
do you think
of
this
our
report
overall.
doesn't reflect that?
I mean, I haven't read the
It's
report.
290
I haven't read the report, and I'm very far from an expert in the subject. But as someone was just saying, there's the report, and then there's how it is used in the media and used in politics, and those two things are often really rather different. And we should be, especially with this issue, trying to get away from that.
Salma James, for the moment, thank you both very much indeed. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we're going to hear from Labour's shadow policing minister as the party sets out plans to crack down on shoplifters. And how the Prime Minister was forced to apologise for wearing trendy trainers. Well, with just 3 weeks to go until we get the local elections, both Labour and the Conservatives have been out on the campaign trail, talking tough on retail crime. In a government U-turn, the Prime Minister today announced that assaulting a shop worker is to be made a separate criminal offence. That is, despite ministers previously insisting that creating a new offence wasn't needed to tackle the issue because it's already covered by existing laws. Well, instead we get a new offence that's going to carry a maximum sentence of 6 months imprisonment or an unlimited fine. That is the same sentence for the existing offence of common assault. Under the plans, repeat offenders, including consistent shoplifters, could also be forced to wear an electronic tag. And all this follows a steep rise in violence and abuse targeting shop workers, with figures from the British Retail Consortium showing a 50% rise in reported incidents last year. Prime Minister said the new powers will demonstrate to shop workers that they have their back.
I have been concerned by the rise in retail crime, as I'm sure many others are, either seeing it or on social media, which is why today we've announced a strong set of measures to clamp down on retail crime. That's about a new offence, a brand new offence for assaulting shop workers, using facial recognition technology to catch perpetrators with CCTV, but also greater use of electronic tagging of prolific shoplifters. It's been warmly welcomed by retailers and police that I've spoken to today, and crucially will demonstrate to our shop workers that we've got their back, and also that we will do what it takes to keep our streets and our communities safe. That's what everybody wants. That's what we'll deliver.
Well, Labour were also out and about campaigning on retail today, unveiling plans to revive the British High Street. During a visit to Teesdale, the party's Shadow Chancellor, Home Secretary and Deputy Party Leader talked up a 5-point plan, which includes reforming business rates and, tougher laws on shoplifting. Well, a little earlier, I got a response to the plans from the Shadow Policing Minister, Alex Norris. Alex Norris, thanks ever so much for joining us. Let's kick off with this thorny question of what do you do about shoplifting? The government says it wants to create legislation for the specific crime of assaulting a shop worker. Would you go along with that?
Well, yes. I mean, Adam, if I'm honest, I've been trying to introduce legislation to that effect for 5.5 years, as recently as earlier this year, I think February, and the government have voted against it at every turn. So I was delighted that they have seen the light on this issue. The reality is, I'm afraid, in that 5.5 years, the incidences of violence and abuse against retail workers have trebled, as the government have increasingly lost a grip of our high streets. So this is a start, but frankly, there's much, much more that will need to be done.
Very few people are actually prosecuted for violence or abuse of shop workers at the moment. Why would this make any difference, do you think?
Well, in and of itself, it won't resolve the problem. It helps because it makes it more easy. Frankly, it's simpler for police to enforce against. It makes it simpler for prosecutors. Obviously, it makes it simpler in court systems. So we know that's got to be a good thing. We also know that the same thing is on the statute book in Scotland and has had that effect. So this isn't a jump into the unknown. So it alone won't solve it, but in and of itself, it will give us another tool, both to deter but also to prosecute those who do the wrong thing.
Don't we actually need a lot more police in order, because you look at the reasons why people don't get referred for prosecution. Very often it's shops say, well, they don't think the police will do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit on a really important issue there. Shoplifting's up, say, 30% this year. We know that over a 10-year period is really significant indeed. Violence and abuse at epidemic levels. It's reasonable to ask why. And it's reasonable to ask why people have completely lost confidence in there being an adequate response or any action being taken. And that's because we've hollowed out neighbourhood policing in this country. We've got 10,000 fewer neighbourhood police than we did have. So as a result, our officers who are doing their best are just simply overstretched. So that's why we've got the commitment to add back 13,000 police and police community support officers in communities, deterring and detecting crime. But also, we mustn't forget the absolutely dreadful legacy of the decision to downgrade crime that is under £200, as if somehow that's victimless, as in somehow that doesn't matter. Well, it does to small businesses. It also gave succour to those who think they can go into shops and take what they want, and that often leads then to violence, leads to abuse. And again, that has to change, and we're committed to remove that too. These things have political causes that have led to this staggering increase, and therefore we need political solutions. The government of the day have shown themselves unwilling and unable to provide that, and we're ready to do so.
I want to ask you about a couple of other big social issues. The Cass review into gender identity in young people and children released today. Do you think that has drawn any kind of line under this issue? Because it has been so divisive.
yeah, I mean, it's impossible. I'm afraid in my line of work, as in yours, as in many people who are watching, you have to be on social media. And if you're on social media, you know you're never far from a really, really divisive argument about issues relating to transgender and transgender people. I think today is a really significant moment. You know, I think colleagues have described it as a watershed. I'd share that you know, this is an important review. It's clearly been done very well, and we should thank the review team for doing that, and has pointed us to some very, very difficult questions around young people and how we meet their needs, both with regards to gender dysphoria, but also more widely their mental and physical health needs. And we should now want to de-escalate that kind of argument and get to an evidence base that allows us to make sure we're making safe public policy decisions, allowing people to live their lives as they are, free from threats of abuse and whatnot. And this, I think, could be a real moment for that.
You could look at this review and say that by demanding long-term evidence and research, it's effectively kicking the can down the road and leaving the problem for many years in the future. I mean, do you understand the anger that some trans groups are expressing today when they say they don't feel supported?
Yeah, I mean, the review has highlighted in its right areas, or in the areas they consider right, that there is a lack of evidence. I think that that's probably fair. So it is right for them to say that, therefore, you know, we should gather that evidence. Of course it is. We want evidence-based policy making in this and in every area. It has also pointed at other important things about how we treat children and how we meet their mental health needs. That's been very clear about things that we've got to get on with now. So, you know, I think that's found that balance. You know, I'd hope people wouldn't be upset by this. You know, this is a serious report based on evidence that's talking about how to meet the needs of children, often children who have the most profound mental health challenges or other challenges in their life. And we should want to act on that and to therefore meet these challenges. And I think this gives us a good roadmap forwards. And it's, you know, one we certainly would be keen to adopt. And I think the government are probably in a similar place.
There will be those who look at this report, they look at the trans issues, they remember, of course, the horrendous murder of Brianna Ghey. And I wonder, if you were in charge of policing in this country, just tell us how much weight would you put on protecting minority communities, and particularly we're talking about the trans community here?
Yeah, I mean, I that's one of the real sadnesses, I think, of I don't really want to call it a debate, but of all the sort of the anger and the discourse online. That at the root we have, you know, people who are really vulnerable, who have some of the worst educational outcomes, as you say, in violence and abuse. And we should centre that support and, you know, that desire to look after them. They're in all, you know, it's our community, every member of it, whoever they are, ought to get that support. So, you know, I think we need to see that. And that case, you know, of course, was so serious and involved someone losing their life. So, you know, I think we need to dial down that kind of tribal style rhetoric and instead work back from the fact that, you know, we're all people, we're all together, and we have a responsibility to each other. And I know that sounds like quite an old-fashioned approach, but it's certainly mine.
Alex Norris, thank you very much for joining us today. Well, Salma and James are still with me. Salma, I mean, looking after retailers, clearly there's a significant problem there. But I mean, do we really need another law which does effectively the same as the assault law we've already got?
Well, I mean, if you're putting this through and creating new legislation and people are welcoming it and, you know, have asked for things like this, I think it is emblematic of the fact that this crime is changing slightly. And one of the things and one of the reasons retailers are applying a lot of pressure onto government about this is because they are seeing a real uptick in these kinds of crimes that are affecting their bottom line. So this is becoming very difficult because there are organised gangs who are running shoplifting schemes and, you know, becoming more violent. And that is what's caused this to become an extra offence. The only thing that I think might be tricky, and this is about the delivery of it, is how do you get this legislation through Parliament at this point in time? Again, in an election context, again, with so much other legislation that needs to come through. So there might be some truth in what you're saying in that we are talking about potential legislation. We don't know when, in reality, that might come into force.
And James, yet again, you kind of look at these announcements, and there just isn't an awful lot of difference, it seems to me, between the rhetoric of the Conservatives and the rhetoric of Labour.
No, they're running a very similar grid. I mean, also on the same day, they both happen to be going and seeing police and talking about shoplifting. There's not an enormous amount of difference. I mean, actually, in Labour's 5-point plan, there are a couple of points which, if I were doing it, I would be emphasising instead, because they do have a point of difference. There's something against late payment, so small businesses that have invoices with much bigger businesses that aren't paid in time. That's a real problem for small businesses, and I would be emphasising some of those things. But I think Labour are very concerned that they're going to be seen as weak on crime or something like that, so they want to talk basically the same language as the Tories. It's not enormously inspiring when you look at our high streets, and if you think the main problem is shoplifting, that isn't the main. The issues with our high streets have been going on for an extremely long time. There are lots of underlying things, and we need them back. We need them as both for business, but also as a kind of heart of a community. And nothing of what we're really hearing from either party at the moment really goes into that.
And Salma, is this basically a shadow election campaign that's kicking off, whether it's local elections or looking ahead to a general election?
Look, I don't think that anything that either the government or the opposition says could be seen in any other context or any other light. And this is the part of the election cycle, and James will probably know better than me, but that part in the election cycle where you're trying to sort of blow off the cobwebs, dust things up, making sure that you're setting out your dividing lines and you set out your stall on things. And that's what you're going to see a lot more of. This is kind of the technical beats that you have in advance of that campaign.
And, I mean, James, we mentioned it just there, but if you were advising the Labour Party now, outright, would you say, look, just keep it low-key, just make sure you don't drop the ball?
I mean, at this stage, that is what they're going to do. And they will win the general election by a healthy margin because of how badly the Tories have governed for the last 14 years. Most people are worse off than they were 14 years ago. Public services are in a worse state. So that is how they will win. I don't think that is a programme for changing the country. And given that we have a lot of quite serious crises, we need to have much more serious dividing lines and policies put forward that would improve people's lives. And at the moment, that isn't really there.
Right. Salma, I think, isn't convinced they're going to stride to victory, but we'll maybe come back to that a bit later on. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The Prime Minister apologises after being accused of ruining Adidas sandals. If you don't know what they are, we'll explain. Can politicians ever look cool in trainers? It is the next big debate.
Hello, coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the asylum seekers living under the radar after their applications to stay in the UK were rejected. We have a special report for you inside the asylum crisis. And we're going to discuss NHS gender services after a damning report found children are being let down. The staff are simply too scared of a toxic debate to openly discuss transgender issues. That's the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
Now, it was the image that launched warnings of the death of a popular trainer. Rishi Sunak in a box-fresh pair of Adidas Sambas, worn with some rather short suit trousers and a white shirt. Fashion magazines, social media users alike accused the Prime Minister of killing the credibility of those much-beloved trainers. And speaking on LBC Radio, he's now apologised.
Well, first of all, I just issue a fulsome apology to the Samba community. But in my defence, I would say I have been wearing Adidas trainers and Sambas and others, in fact, for many, many years. Actually, the first pair my brother got for me many, many years ago. My first pair of fun Adidas trainers as a Christmas present, and I haven't looked back since.
Well, the PM seemed a bit surprised by the focus on what he was wearing, but writing on X, the former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "Welcome to the everyday world of a woman in politics." Not a fair point. It's not the first time the PM's been criticised for his choice of footwear. When he wore these Timberlands, some online comments said he should worry less about stopping the boats and more about stopping the boots. Then we had, other politicians who've had their choice of footwear under scrutiny. Here's Sir Keir Starmer, accused of looking like a dad trying to be cool, which, to be fair, is what he might have been, on social media after sporting these blue Adidas trainers. Who can forget David Cameron's infamous Velcro Converses during his time as leader of the opposition in 2006? But can any of them beat the former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who had to apologise after his office photoshopped white trainers onto a picture of him and his family used on his official website? If the shoes weren't bad enough, take a look. They actually gave him 2 left feet. Pretty horrible, very quick word. Marks out of 10 for wearing trainers. Good idea, terrible idea?
But look, bad for politicians. I think politicians should dress appropriately.
James, would you do this?
Would I wear trainers? I'm wearing trainers right now.
You're wearing trainers now. If you were advising it, would Jeremy Corbyn ever have gone out in a white pair of white Sambas?
Jeremy went out in a fantastic Wilson matching sweatsuit and trainers, and I think that's a good look.
James Homer, thank you very much indeed. That's it from tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee.